Welcome to Panels and Borders. I'm Dominic, and this video I decided I wasn't going to do a video about this, but me and my friends have been talking about it for a few days now since all this went down. So I decided I'm going to do a video about diversity and comics and the whole controversy surrounding Jawbreakers. So this whole thing, I watched this whole thing with Jawbreakers and the Mark Waid thing all unfold while I was on vacation with my girlfriend. And it was pretty interesting to watch. And Diversity in Comics, I started following his channel probably last summer sometime. And there's a lot of things he says that's going on in the comics industry that I agree with. And but some of his methods I don't agree with. So I agree with his message, but not really, sometimes not his methods. And now, with my own personal experience with Marvel and DC, I actually gave up Marvel and DC, their monthly titles, actually before all of this SJW stuff really took hold, for lack of a better term. It's been a few years. I've been slowly getting back into DC Comics with their New Age of Heroes lineup. But Marvel, the only thing I buy from Marvel now is their Epic Collections and their older stuff. But no new monthly titles. I haven't bought any of them. And the time that I gave up comics, like the two mainstream comics. See, the two monthly titles I always collected was Batman and The Incredible Hulk. And I gave up The Incredible Hulk and Batman at the same time. It was right around the time that they were doing the Doc Green storyline with the Hulk. And Batman was doing the, I think it was in the New 52. Now, I kept collecting the New 52 until that run stopped. Just because I love Greg Capullo's artwork so much. And it is supposed to be a really good storyline, which I haven't read yet, but will sometime in the future. Now, my reasons for giving them up was the Hulk had, the reason why I gave up the Hulk was storylines were getting kind of dull, and it seemed like they didn't know what they were doing with the character or where they're going to take the character, and the character just seemed tapped out. They had done the Planet Hulk thing, and that was pretty good. Then they did the Red Hulk storyline, and they kind of dragged that out longer than they should have, until it just basically ran out of steam. And then they went into Hulk Agent of Time, which I really didn't like that storyline. And then it went into the Doc Green stuff. And at that point, that was enough for me. Plus, the artwork was really starting to go downhill. And, you couldn't keep like a consistently good artist on the book. So I just gave up. And Batman, I just collected until the Greg Capullo run ran out. And then I gave that up. And then I switched over to Valiant and started collecting X-O Manowar and Ninjak. And then with IDW, I started collecting Rom the Space Knight. But Rom the Space Knight has since been canceled. Now, I didn't notice any of the politics in the books then, but that was before all the politics really took hold. And it wasn't too long after I gave up the Hulk that they announced that they would have a new Hulk and title called Totally Awesome Hulk. And it would be Amadeus Cho would be the new Hulk. And he was like a character he was been a character that's been around in the Hulk comics for a while. But his abilities he would always help the Hulk out, and he was like really super smart and stuff and can calculate stuff in his head. And so when all this stuff kind of happened, they made the switched all these characters over. They kind of alienated a lot of the fans because you're used to, see, I'm a fan of the old Hulk smash Savage Hulk. And that was always my favorite version of the Hulk. And so I never really liked it when they changed it up a lot. I always liked that version of the Hulk. And so I wasn't really that wasn't going to bring me back at all. Them doing the Totally Awesome Hulk just didn't do it. And plus, I didn't like the artwork that they were doing in that comic. Plus, turned me off. So a lot of the stuff that Diversity in Comics said that I agreed with. Some of his methods I don't agree with. And I say that because when you're dealing with, I guess, the SJWs, for lack of a better term, they're always looking for the piece of rope that they can hang you with. And if you push the line too far, you might slip up and provide them with that piece of rope. So, in my opinion, if it was me, I would have kept it as diplomatic as possible. Now some people might make the argument, doesn't matter what, they're going to turn on you anyway, and maybe there's some truth to that. So I followed Diversity in Comics since last summer, and then he announced he was going to do the comic Jawbreakers. Now here's the comic right here. And so he announced Jawbreakers, he was going to do it, and I decided to back the Kickstarter. Now when I backed it, it was at $30,000 at that point. And I'm always looking for something different to read, something kind of outside Marvel and DC. And so I decided, to give this a shot. The artwork looked good, and so it seemed like an interesting concept. So I decided to get it. And I had recently backed another Kickstarter. Last year actually, I backed a Kickstarter for Bart Sears and got his books. And I was really impressed with him, really liked it. So that was my first crack at backing a Kickstarter. So this, the Jawbreakers is actually my second crack at this crowdfunding type thing. And this seems to be like it's going to be more and more of a thing in the future, because you can bypass the shops and the distributors. So you get a bigger cut of your book. And I can see a lot of creators doing stuff like this more and more in the future. And so anyway, I backed Jawbreakers. And everything was pretty quiet on the Jawbreakers front until Antarctic Press decided to pick up the book. And when Antarctic Press decided to pick up the book, that's when shit really hit the fan, and it's been splattering ever since. So they picked up the book, and I was watching this whole thing unfold on my Twitter feed. They picked the book, and then everything was like, everyone was congratulating them, and it was like, it felt like a real win. And then seemed like no time, like maybe the next day, Arctic Press dropped it. Decided they weren't going to have it, and they decided to drop it. And apparently Mark Waid had called them and allegedly put some pressure on them, used his clout with Marvel to put some pressure on them, get them to drop the book. And this caused a whole huge stink, and then Mark Waid went black on social media. He just disappeared. All of his accounts and everything disappeared. So I watched all this unfold and on Twitter, and it was quite an interesting thing. And now there's quite the feud, and there has been quite a feud between Diversity in Comics and Mark Waid for a while. I mean, it's a pretty intense feud. I haven't seen a feud this intense since Stone Cold Steve Austin and Vince McMahon had their feud back in the 90s. So it's a pretty intense feud. And so then, on top of that, these other comic shops came out and decided they weren't going to back the comic. They weren't going to order it in. And they had kind of colluded together on a Facebook page to not order the comic. And I believe it was 12 shops. I'm not sure, but that's what I've heard. It was 12 shops in total. And so I'm the kind of person that if you really want me to get me to buy a book, is tell me not to buy the book. I don't agree with everything Diversity in Comics says, and I don't agree with a lot of his methods. But one thing I am a big advocate of, and that's free speech. I'm a huge free speech guy, and I don't like the idea of someone else deciding what you can and can't say and what you can and can't publish. And I mean, when I say that this is not a government body that's trying to squash this book or anything like that, this is just like another person trying to take law into their own hands, as far as I'm concerned, trying to decide who can and can't have a comic. So, and one of the comic shops that came out and decided to block this comic, or not block the comic, they came out and said they would not order this book. However, they did say they would do special orders, so they were kind of like on the fence. So I don't know. And I actually don't live too far from this comic shop, and I'm probably about a 40 minutes drive, and the comic shop is Variant Edition. And so now here the screen grab is when I did a search for them on Twitter and found out that I was blocked. Now, I guess I'm blocked because I follow Diversity in Comics. And in my opinion, this is a mistake for this business, or any business to do this. I think if you're a business, you should stay out of the politics end of it and not get involved, because you're going to alienate some part of your customer base. Guaranteed. Doesn't matter which side of the political fence you land on, you're going to alienate one side of it. So, and here's the thing. If they really didn't want this comic in their store, just don't order it. But they should have just been quiet. And for all they know, maybe no one would have even ordered the book in their store. And they could have kept quiet and stayed neutral and not, but they decided to make like a public stance against this book. And then on top of that, used the block to block anyone that was following Diversity in Comics. And then God knows how many of their own regular customers that they may have alienated by doing this. Now, I've never went to their store, and I've never contacted them on Twitter. I've never contacted them on Facebook. I've had no interaction. The only interaction I've ever had with this store is one of the employees gave me their card for their store at a little collector con. That's it. But I, for sure now, will never step foot in their store. And I don't know, maybe they just assume that anyone who follows Diversity in Comics is, a horrible person. But I mean, people are going to follow people for all kinds of different reasons. I mean, you might follow people. I mean, I follow people that I disagree with, and I follow people that I agree with. I mean, you might be following Diversity in Comics because you disagree with them and you want to debate them, or maybe you just want to see what the other side of the argument is. I mean, there's all kinds of different reasons, so who knows? And then on top of that, Variant Edition had their store was broken into and apparently some money stolen. And then they went and claimed it was a follower of Diversity in Comics that targeted their story and did this to them, which this is just purely a claim. There's no proof of that at all. None. That's just something they claimed. And then on the other side, people are saying, well, they probably just broke into their own store themselves and, they're just doing this for attention. I mean, and same thing. That's just a claim. No evidence of that at all either. The only thing that is for certain is their store was vandalized, broken into. That's it. So, I mean, this whole thing got really, really crazy, and a lot of people drew a hard, because of what happened the weekend, all this went down the same weekend, and it caused a lot of people in the comic books community to draw a hard line in the sand, and now people have really taken sides because of this. And, so it's going to be interesting to see how all this plays out. And, it's kind of sad to see that, the community is going through this. I mean, all my time collecting comics, I don't remember of anything this divisive and controversial ever. And here's the other thing, too. Like, people who don't want this book to exist or try to block this book or, like, this never works. And people never learn. Like, when you try to censor something or block something, it only makes it more successful than what it was. Like, this is not the first time this has been tried. Like, a really good example, years and years and years ago, there was a book that came out called The Da Vinci Code by an author named Dan Brown. And at the time, Dan Brown was, he wasn't well known like he is now. Before this book came out, he was probably a well-known author, but not like he was. I mean, he wrote a book called The Da Vinci Code, and basically the whole gist of the book was Jesus and Mary Magdalene had a child together, and Mary Magdalene escaped to France and hid away and had Jesus's child, and there was a secret society that ever since then on was protecting the bloodline of Christ, and that Christ was just a mortal man. He wasn't the Son of God. Well, when this book came out, Christians went nuts, and they wanted this book, basically same thing. They didn't want this book to exist, and there was a huge stink in the media over this book, and because of Christians raising such a stink, it got so much coverage. It was bought by, the sales went through the roof for this book. And I mean, that's why I bought it, because there was such a media stink around this book. I went out and bought the book because I didn't know what's going on. I mean, you kept hearing about this book. Well, what's the stink around this book? So I went out and I bought the book, and I read the book. And then because of that, I have read almost all of Dan Brown's books, with the exception of one book, and that's Digital Fortress. But all his other books I've read. And I've been a fan of Dan Brown's books ever since. And it all started, now if they didn't kick up a huge stink about that book, if they just never said anything and just, let the book come out, it would have never skyrocketed to the point that it did. And it made the book 10 times more popular. And, book would have just came out and gone. But because of that, the book shot up hugely in popularity. It put Dan Brown like on the map. They made the book into a movie, made three of his books into movies. So that whole trying to block something, that never works. And another example of that is a book by an author named Philip Pullman. He wrote a trilogy of books, which was the Golden Compass was one of the books, and same thing, the Catholic Church kicked up a huge stink about that book. Same thing, I heard about the controversy surrounding that book, so I had to know, well, what's so controversial about this book? So I bought the whole trilogy of books. So that's how these kind of things go. Now this comic is just, it was at 30,000 when I backed it. Now it's at like over 300,000. So, I mean, it's just riding a wave of controversy right to the top. Now, the interesting thing about this is, and I've talked about this with some of my other friends, is when the book, no one's really talking what the book's about, or is the book actually going to be any good? Everyone's just talking about the controversy around this book. And this is like a rebellion book. People are buying this book just purely to rebel against the established comic book pro community, I guess. People are just buying the book, to protest, you're not, and that. So, but the thing is the story going to be any good? That's the question. Is the novel, the graphic novel itself going to be any good? So I am really eager to read it and see if Diversity in Comics, I'm curious to see what Diversity in Comics writing is like, if he can write a good story or not. Now, when the book comes out, I am going to review it, and I'm going to put up a video about my review, and I'm going to be review it as fairly as possible, and I'm going to basically give my opinion on if it's good or if it's bad or in between. So that's what I'm curious about, because the book so far has been riding a wave right to the top. And the other thing is, now, when they announced that they're going to start their own comic book company, Diversity in Comics, and the guys involved with him, the next thing is when they start their own company. I think it's called Splato Comics. The next thing that's going to happen is they're going to start getting blocked at cons. At Comic Cons, because these guys are not out of the woods yet. Even when this comic book comes and goes, Jawbreakers, and if they want to do the promotion tours, like say go from cons around the country, people are going to be trying to get them blocked at cons. That'll be the next thing. Hopefully they don't get blocked. Hopefully they can get in there to promote their book and do signings. I know I would like to get my copy. I'd like to meet the guy behind this. I'd like to see him come to one of the cons in my town. But that'll be the next thing for sure. So they got a long battle ahead of them, these guys. So it'll be interesting to see how well their comic book company does, and it'll be interesting to see what other creators they pick up along the way and what other titles they get. And it'll be really... so I think this whole... And this whole thing, this culture war that's going on in comic books now, it's interesting. It's fascinating, but at the same time, kind of disheartening, because gets tiresome to hear about it and tiresome to see it, the battle going back and forth on Twitter and social media and stuff. It'd be nice just to have, for things to level out again and just be what it was with the, just comics just being fun like they were. I mean, and comics still are fun. There's still a lot of comics on the market, and there's something for everyone out there. And I think that whole thing with hashtag Move the Needle proves that there are a lot of comics that you can enjoy, comics that aren't political, and you can just read them and escape into that fantasy world and have fun. So it's still that place. You just got to know where to look for it. So that's everything that I wanted to say about this whole thing with Mark, with the whole Diversity in Comics and Mark Waid, and be curious to see how this feud plays out between Mark Waid and Diversity Comics going forward. And so let me know what you think in the comments. And, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. And I will see you at the next one.